Content warning. This series deals with the topic of sexual assault. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is strong pressure on any Trotskyist, or quasi-Trotskyist leader to go for broke when they reach 50 years of age. There is the knowledge that they are in the tradition of Lenin, who led the Bolshevik Revolution when he too was in his 50s. The idea that they might let this opportunity escape them is almost too horrible to imagine, so they take all sorts of gambles. Such pressures must have weighed on David Koresh, who, like Jesus, was in his early 30s when the Waco confrontation developed. Louis Project, 1998.
While the Occupy movement proved to be a peak for recruitment, the 2010s would quickly get rocky, returning to a trend that was quietly building as early as 2007. Behind the scenes, the ISO's campus focus was alienating the older members. For those who joined in the 80s, many of these people were now in their early to mid-40s. Some of them had children or day jobs and couldn't find the time to staff book sales and maintain a healthy personal life. So some people started to leave the organization entirely. 7 of these parties eventually spoke to one another and realized that they all had similar experiences. They then penned an open letter and a blog called Socialist OUTPOST. Before publishing it, one of the authors, Sepehri, claims that he informed Ahmed Shawki about his concerns and that a blog would be going up discussing them. It gained traction in the early Facebook age, spreading like wildfire amongst left-leaning blogs, forums, and chat rooms. Everyone in the ISO, or adjacent to it, was aware of this website. Elsewhere, similar articles started popping up, often with similar experiences. In response, 2 members of the ISO penned a letter condemning the Socialist Outpost writers for criticizing the group from the outside. A week later, Socialist Worker editor Alan Mass and ISO member Eric Reuter wrote a more in-depth critique. Following this, the Outpost bloggers each wrote about their individual experiences and why they left. One of these was Adam Turl, who was the district organizer of the group in Chicago and felt that Sharon Smith of the steering committee had pushed him to make odd decisions in rallying the group's activist efforts. Sepehri, who was a senior member of the ISO, and his wife Sophie, wrote that they were excluded over what they felt was Sharon Smith playing personality politics. He claimed that Smith and Shawki had fostered a culture where personality trumped political realities, where projects would just be cancelled just because someone didn't like someone else. Sepehri's doubts with the organization started slowly, but they built up exponentially. The first was a failed experiment, as he called it, pushed at the behest of Sharon Smith in 2006. Smith apparently said that the steering committee wanted to use older members to build a branch in a strategic neighborhood in Chicago, which was Logan Square. The issue was that most of these members didn't live in the neighborhood and had no experience with the local issues. It was an unmitigated disaster and pulled away many resources from the group. So, Ahmed and Sharon started to push a tried and true approach, build up campus branches. This frustrated both Saman and Sophie.
And so suddenly we went from reading, writing articles, and engaging with comrades on the international left, to figuring out which gray-haired 40-something was going to drive 35 miles to a community college to staff a lit table in the middle of a workday. Sophie wanted no part of it. She already commutes 35 miles out to a college every day.
The couple had other specialties. Sophie was deeply focused on work for single-payer healthcare, something she was pulled away from to focus on the failed branch experiment. As an Iranian, Saman was deeply focused on solidarity work with the dissidents amid the Green Revolution protest movement, which was ongoing in Iran at the time. He even traveled to Tehran and had an eyewitness account of the situation on the ground. His work on the subject was reportedly discouraged. By the time of the ISO convention in 2009, he was openly discussing their issues with other activists, which then led to a confrontation with Sharon Smith.
On Sunday, prior to leaving the convention in between 2 sessions, we approached Sharon simply to say goodbye. We were met with vitriol. Right there on the floor of the convention, in front of other comrades, Sharon berated us, called us poison and miserable, a tactic of making us toxic in front of other comrades, so that no one would talk to us. The pretext was discussions we had had with others, discussions at which she had not been present, but any excuse would have sufficed. True to form, Sharon had once again heard something from a close associate and decided to react imperiously. Sophie tried to defuse the situation, but was treated with more rage and rancor as a response. We left the convention, perplexed, upset, and angry.
Days later, Saman found a voicemail from an ISO functionary, claiming that Sophie was no longer a member. The two eventually met with steering committee members Sean Harkin and Paul D'Amato, who informed them that it was less that she was kicked out, but a request from Smith for a cooling-off period. Both were banned from ISO branch meetings. Salmon accepted the terms. Sophie objected. Weeks passed, and there was no indication that they would be allowed back. Then months passed, and after years of email correspondence, they gave up on ever trying to participate again. Meanwhile, a university professor, Loretta Capeheart, was sponsoring the ISO club on the campus of Northeastern University. She said that leadership abandoned her while she attempted to save the campus group. Apparently, the group had been accused of violence and harassment. There apparently had been a confrontation during an anti-war protest. She claims that she risked her job to support the students, while she claimed that the ISO did nothing. Later, Capeheart entered a years-long legal battle with the university, in which she claimed that she was passed up on promotions due to her advocacy. She eventually settled with NEIU for an undisclosed sum. Capeheart and her partner Ramon left after this debacle. Adam Turl left in 2011. Content warning: sexual assault. A crisis is brewing elsewhere on the left in 2013. The Socialist Workers Party, over in the UK, had been accused of covering up a rape perpetrated by a senior member. The scandal rocked the organization all year, leading to many student wings leaving, articles in British newspapers, and outright ridicule from all sectors of the English-speaking left worldwide. The blog and the crisis in the SWP proved to be a catalyst for a contested ISO leadership election, the first one since 1983. For the 2014 convention, about a dozen members, mostly from East Coast branches, established what was known as the Renewal Faction, which was a group that offered an opposing slate to the largely Chicago-based Smith and Shockey clique, who had governed the group for nearly 30 years at this point. Formed shortly after the publication of the Outpost letter, the faction was mostly inspired by a member by the name of Sean Joseph. Joseph got into a disagreement with members in the Boston chapter, but decided to leave the ISO until he decided to then just rejoin through the Cambridge branch. Members there had tried to petition for his reinstatement, despite having voluntarily left the Boston chapter. Joseph was barred from rejoining at the behest of the steering committee, who wanted Boston's leadership to weigh in and if he was worthy of coming back into the fold. The group promised to change the organization's direction and offer a better approach. They also openly questioned the role of CIRSC in the group's activities. In one blog post, they brought attention to how Ahmed was employed by CIRSC and how its board of directors were nearly all members of the steering committee of the ISO. This was met with firm opposition from many members of the ISO, and an all-out verbal assault was set off within the convention's bulletins, a blog run by the faction, and even Facebook. At one point, Renewal Faction member Vanessa Beck got into a Facebook argument with Kianga Yamada Taylor, a progressive scholar who was on the ISO steering committee. Beck made a snarky reply on Taylor's Facebook wall over a post about race relations. So, for context, for a very long time, the ISO claimed that white people didn't benefit from racism, among other criticisms of identity politics. This line seems to have prompted the reply from Beck, who was already on poor terms with Taylor after a previously heated argument back in 2008. Beck accused her of being unprofessional as a leader of the group. Taylor, frustrated with the back and forth, said,
"I'm just not who you think I am. I don't really care what you are a member of other than the trifling ass bullshit committee. Now go write an open letter about how I said mean things."
Shortly after, Beck was expelled from the organization after Taylor informed Ahmed Shockey of Beck's minimal or skipped due payments. Beck claims to have been on disability and had a limited income, largely coming from government assistance. She states that her and Ahmed, who is also treasurer of the ISO, had an agreement where she could pay less. Shockey claimed her recently recorded $6 cash payment was far below the accepted $20 minimum, and that she needed to provide records of all of her prior payments. Problem was, these were all in cash and likely unrecorded. This series of online back and forths would continue until something happened that would horrify the entire left. Content warning: sexual assault. It had come to light that the ISO's then leadership had mishandled a sexual assault allegation. In the ISO's pre-convention bulletin number 19, dated February 5th, 2014, Section 2 of the document discusses an alleged sexual misconduct incident in San Diego, sometimes referred to as Xville to keep the situation under wraps. Chuck Stemke, better known as Comrade Daniel, was accused of sexually assaulting a member. Stemke had just been published in Socialist Worker criticizing sexual harassment over in a municipal government. Upon reading this article, this angered a member of the Party of Socialism and Liberation, a rival group with a Marxist-Leninist quasi-Stalinist political orientation. She personally knew the victim and was aware of these allegations. This PSL affiliate then accused the ISO's leadership of a cover-up. As the branch at large became aware, the details began to pour in.
It became clear during that meeting that the incident had occurred a year prior in July 2012, and that at least some members of the branch had been aware through accusations made by people close to the victim, but not the victim herself, or by rumor. In 2012, no formal investigation had been made, By the end of the meeting in July 2013, an investigation committee was formed, and the committee members were chosen based on the comfort of the victim, the objectivity of the members regarding the accused, and the knowledge and training of members in intimate violence and gender depression.
As the investigation proceeded, it was discovered that members of the San Diego Branch Committee and some steering committee members were aware of the allegations. Steering had declared it a local matter and that it could not be discussed with outsiders. This apparently had created a rift in the branch, and members of the San Diego ISO branch became disillusioned with the whole process. Stemke then resigned. Along with this document detailing the debacle, San Diego branch writ large included a proposal to reform the internal grievance policy. Shortly after it was released, someone leaked the PDF of the Bulletin online, and it became widely accessible on the blog The Charnel House. Bulletin number 19, and eventually a trove of other internal convention bulletins as far back as 2010, were sent to the blog's owner, Ross Wolf. Now, I was one of the individuals who submitted documents, all of which were from the 2012 convention. I do not know who the other leakers were. The leaks, strangely enough, became a bit of a controversy amongst the internet left. Some individuals got rather militant about secrecy culture. Others highlighted that the ISO's leadership had possibly covered up a sexual assault case, and then slept on it for over a year. Great Moments in Leftism, a webcomic popular amongst dissident leftists at the time, lampooned it. According to Wolf, one disgruntled member posted the following online.
So this is how the ISO steering committee works, I guess. If someone sends angry emails to an important Lenin scholar, start getting involved later that day. If someone's critical of the leadership and is late paying dues, or hasn't paid enough, send an email saying he or she isn't a member anymore. If a member rapes someone, don't do anything for over a year. Hide this from most members of the branch in question, and take it to the disciplinary committee only after the rest of the branch finds out accidentally. If someone leaks documents showing that the steering committee covered up the above-mentioned rape to bad socialists like Ross Wolf, make snarky Facebook comments attacking the offending member for being disloyal. Maybe they were just having another 3-margarita meeting.
The Renewal Faction then released its own statement on its own blog, harshly criticizing the leadership for acting so slowly on the allegations. Eventually, they too slowly began releasing their own separate convention bulletin documents as well, after their submissions were blocked from the internal convention bulletin. This led to accusations and name-calling on both sides. The steering committee and the loyalists began to denounce renewal members on Facebook or posted in solidarity with the steering committee. This tense atmosphere was at a fever pitch, and when it finally came time for the convention, it finally blew up. According to an article by ex-ISO member Brandy Baker for the ISO critical blog North Star, the delegates were charged for any paperwork for the convention. These were things like the rules of decorum or the docket and schedule. Compared to other years, a rule was added about keeping all proceedings secret. Renewal members had a very icy reception, with loyalist members reportedly hovering over them behind their backs, which Baker postulates was in hopes of catching them leaking more documents. Much of the loyalist faction claimed that the ISO renewal members were agents of the American government, coming to crush the group. Prominent ISO member Joe Allen is reported to have said at the event,
"We knew when we live-streamed Glenn Greenwald we would be targeted by the state, and this is what it looks like."
Ahmed Shawky and some loyalist members continued the tirades against the faction, with Shawky supposedly claiming, "There is no need for factions in the ISO. Factions always end up poorly. Like this instance." One of the few members of the faction to speak was reportedly shaken by the barrage from Shawky and others. It is claimed that he was hissed and booed at by others in attendance. Sharon Smith then made her statement against the group. Baker describes the incident as follows.
Renewal were scolded by Sharon Smith, the ISO national organizer, for daring to demand that the steering committee be held to account for its mistakes in the Daniel Chuck case, and for trying to make the steering committee name the specific SC members who automatically disbelieved the complaint and refused to act on it. In corporate America, a bunglering of a sexual assault case this severe would result in the termination of any supervisors or HR managers on whose watches this occurred. In the ISO, demanding to know who specifically on the steering committee was involved in the Comrade Daniel Chuck case and now gets you a slew of verbal assaults and a one-way ticket out of the organization. Are ISO loyalists really this stupid?
Then another member of the Renewal Faction spoke in defense of their faction statements. He then reiterated the reality of the mishandling of the San Diego case by the ISO leadership. He was reportedly met with heavy boos and jeers and continued hissing. Now, as the 10 minutes hate continued, the following resolution was proposed and then passed.
There has been a shift by the Renewal Faction as a result of not finding significant political support for their initial perspective in the ISO towards more destructive actions that put the organization at risk. These include, but are not limited to, the external bulletin post on CIRSC, which puts the nonprofit at financial risk and makes individuals named vulnerable, the snitch jacketing of a comrade and defense of this by the faction, the external bulletin post declaring that the faction will no longer redact internal documents from its website, even without permission from our organization or individual members, which in practice has already censored comrades from making important contributions to the convention. The external bulletin post that slanderously accuses the ISO Steering Committee, SC, of instinctively disbelieving a woman who brought a sexual assault complaint and reflecting the sexist and patriarchal logic of capitalist society based on a misrepresentation of pre-convention bulletin number 19 without notifying the authors. We feel that we can no longer operate on grounds of mutual trust in an organization where this behavior is allowed. We call on the convention, our highest decision-making body, to vote on the following. We call on all Renewal Faction members to retract support for the aforementioned actions in writing to the SC, and by removing all materials from their website or face disciplinary action, including expulsion, as deemed necessary by the SC immediately following convention. We call on all Renewal Faction delegates and guests to retract their support for the aforementioned actions in writing to the SC in order to be readmitted to convention on Sunday morning. Aaron P., Detroit. Elizabeth W.F., Madison. Aaron A., Jason F., Jonah B., Leah P., New York City. Brian K., Poughkeepsie.
Shortly after, the group was ejected from the convention. That Sunday, the Loyalists held a disciplinary committee meeting. By Monday, all Renewal members were expelled from the ISO. In the aftermath, several ISO branches formally left the ISO, becoming independent socialist groups with similar politics. Among these was the ISO Brown University branch, the one that Shockey was in when he moved to the US and was a foundational part of the organization. Strangely enough, there was also a brief Wikipedia edit war on the ISO's wiki page, where an account sharing the name of steering committee member and SW reporter Nicole Colson, tried to remove mentions of renewal, citing Wikipedia policy. So the years passed and people forgot. After a brief confrontation I had with the group in 2015, I moved on with my life and didn't think about the ISO for years, focusing on my career. That is, until the year 2019, the year that the ISO disbanded.